Stop everything. Pause your scrolling. Shut off your notifications. Because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you thought you knew about your neighborhood, your safety, and the people you call neighbors. December 20th isn't just another date. It's the day when the calm facade cracks and the true nature of power, specifically HOA power, reveals itself in ways you could never imagine. Most people walk right past it, oblivious, caught in routine. But if you're watching this, you already know something feels off. Let me take you back. Just 6 months ago, I thought HOAs were harmless, just annoying little committees. But then came the letter. The envelope, crisp and official, that carried a threat so bizarre, so extreme, it could only come from someone who believes rules are above humanity itself. I still remember holding it, the ink almost burning into my fingers. The kicker? It wasn't just about fees or landscaping. This was personal. And it was timed. December 20th. That date was no accident. Because that's when reality changes. When the quiet control you thought existed evaporates, and the truth hits. Some people in your neighborhood aren't just enforcing rules, they're orchestrating chaos. And once they've chosen their target, there's no turning back. But what happened next? That's where things get intense, and where most people would have already given up. You might think I'm exaggerating, but HOA Karen, the one everyone whispers about behind closed doors, made her presence known that December like a storm with no warning. It started small. A notice about unauthorized landscaping. Then another about improperly parked vehicles. Harmless, right? Just bureaucracy. But the tone was something else entirely. Cold. Calculated. Like she was marking territory, like she was already planning the next move. I tried to reason with her. I emailed, I called, I even offered to meet. Every attempt was met with silence, or worse, a passive-aggressive reply that left me questioning if I was being paranoid. And here's the thing about people like her. They don't just bend rules. They break realities. And if you challenge them, they escalate. December 20th arrived. The morning was deceptively quiet. Birds chirping, sun just peeking over the horizon, but I could feel it. Something in the air. Something shifted. And then it began. First, it was small things. Sprinklers left on in the dead of night. A strange note tucked under my door warning me about future violations. Then came the confrontation. She appeared at my property, not through the front gate, not politely. She just arrived. Standing there, arms crossed, eyes sharper than winter frost. "You've been warned," she said. But it wasn't just about warnings. There was a smugness in her voice, a kind of satisfaction that made it clear this was personal. And here's where it gets eerie. December 20th has a rhythm. Time seems different. The clock ticks, but the air stretches. Moments feel longer, heavier, as if the universe itself is holding its breath, waiting for the next act. That's what makes encounters like this unforgettable. You notice details you'd normally ignore, the way shadows stretch unnaturally, how distant sounds seem closer, how tension hangs like static on the skin. By noon, my entire property felt violated. Not physically, not yet. But psychologically. Every decision I made, every step outside was scrutinized. I wasn't just being watched. I was being controlled. And every HOA rule, every policy became a weapon in her hands. I realized then, December 20th isn't just a date on a calendar. It's a spotlight. A day where the invisible structure of control shows its teeth. And if you aren't prepared, you don't just lose a battle, you lose your sense of reality. But the worst wasn't the letters, the warnings, the silent stares. It was what came next. Something I couldn't predict. Something that would test every boundary I thought existed between neighborly authority and pure obsession. Something that would make me question, who really holds power in this world? And that's exactly when I knew I had two choices: fight, or watch everything I've built crumble under the meticulous, calculated pressure of someone who believes rules are law and law is hers alone. Here's the moment everything crossed a line. Not metaphorically. Not emotionally. Physically. 2 days after December 20th, I woke up to the sound of metal scraping concrete. Not a loud crash. Not something dramatic enough to make you rush outside. Just enough noise to trigger that instinct deep in your gut that whispers, something is wrong. I looked out the window and saw them. HOA contractors. Yellow vests. Clipboards. No warning. No knock on the door. Just men measuring my fence like it was already condemned. I stepped outside and asked the obvious question, "What are you doing on my property?" One of them didn't even look up. He just said, "We were told this fence violates community guidelines. We're here to document it for removal." For removal. That's when HOA Karen emerged. Slow. Confident. Like she'd rehearsed this walk in the mirror. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She smiled. And somehow, that smile was worse than yelling. She explained, very calmly, that my fence was 3 inches too tall according to a bylaw written before the houses were even built. A rule nobody had enforced in over a decade. A rule she had personally rediscovered. And here's the terrifying part, she was technically right. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about the fence. Or the landscaping. Or parking. This was about leverage. About proving that she could reach into my life whenever she wanted, and take something away. I argued. I showed permits. I pulled up emails from previous HOA boards approving everything. She listened patiently, nodded sympathetically, and then said the words that still echo in my head. Those approvals don't apply anymore. Just like that, history erased. Logic dismissed. Reality rewritten. And December 20th suddenly made sense. That date wasn't mystical. It wasn't cosmic. It was strategic. That's when the new HOA board took over. That's when her authority became official. And she wanted her first example to be loud without being noisy. The contractors packed up, for now. But the threat was hanging there, heavy and undeniable. A formal violation notice arrived that afternoon. 30 days to comply. Or fines. Daily fines. Escalating fines. Liens. That night I didn't sleep. I started researching. Forums. Court cases. Horror stories. And that's when I realized how deep this goes. How many people lose their homes not to banks, but to HOAs. Over paint colors. Over grass length. Over fences just like mine. This wasn't personal anymore. It was systemic. And I had unknowingly stepped into a machine that doesn't feel empathy, doesn't compromise, and doesn't stop once it starts turning. But then, I found something. One clause. One overlooked detail buried in the bylaws that even she hadn't noticed yet. And that's when the power dynamic began to shift. Slowly. Quietly. Dangerously. Because the moment you realize the rules can cut both ways is the moment people like HOA Karen lose their greatest weapon. But using it? That would come at a cost I wasn't ready to face yet. The next morning, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. HOA Karen had already proven she could manipulate the system, twist the rules, and make reality bend to her will. But now, armed with that overlooked clause, I had a tiny foothold. A crack in the armor of her control. I spent hours drafting emails, gathering evidence, and documenting every interaction. Every note she left. Every contractor visit. Every silent stare that made my skin crawl. I needed a record. Proof. Because when you face someone like her, who weaponizes bureaucracy, the smallest oversight can become your lifeline, or your doom. By midday I had a plan. But here's the catch. It required precision, timing, and a calculated risk that, if it failed, could make December 20th a nightmare I'd never recover from. The clause gave me leverage, but only if I used it correctly. Only if I acted before she realized what I'd found. I made the first move. A formal appeal, citing the overlooked clause, submitted to the HOA board. I included photos, permits, and past approvals. I didn't expect immediate result. I expected resistance, delay, maybe even retaliation. But I had to try. because letting her continue unchallenged meant losing more than a fence. It meant losing control over my life. Hours passed, and then came the call. Her voice. Calm, sweet, calculated. I see you're trying to play games with the board, she said. Cute. But you should know. I don't lose. Something inside me shifted. I realized that this was no longer about compliance or fences. It was a psychological battle, a test of wills, and she had underestimated one thing: the desperation of someone who refuses to be bullied. That night I watched her movements, subtle, observing patterns, timing her calls, not stalking, just being aware. And it became clear, she was planning her next strike. Another violation notice, another escalation, another opportunity to assert dominance. But this time I was ready. Every move she made, I countered quietly, methodically. Emails meticulously worded. Evidence compiled. Calls returned with calm, controlled responses. Every step was a chess move, and for the first time I felt in control. Then, just as I was starting to feel a glimmer of hope, something happened that shook me. A neighbor, someone I trusted, showed up at my door with a warning. She's not stopping at the rules. She's talking about taking it further. December 20th, she's planning something bigger this year. Bigger. That one word sent a shiver down my spine. December 20th wasn't just about fines or letters anymore. It was about power, influence, fear. And the question that hit me hardest: how far would she go if she thought she could win? And in that moment I realized the full scope of what I was up against. This wasn't a single confrontation. It wasn't just an HOA dispute. This was war. Quiet, cold, legal, psychological. And I had to prepare, because the next move would define everything. December 20th loomed like a storm on the horizon. Every morning felt heavier, every knock on the door more sinister. HOA Karen was no longer just a person. I started thinking of her as a force. Relentless, strategic, unpredictable, and she had the entire neighborhood's attention, whether they realized it or not. I began noticing subtle changes. Yard signs disappearing, letters slipped under doors, neighbors suddenly becoming distant or hesitant to speak. Fear had a way of spreading faster than wildfire in a small community, and she was the spark. Then, the first real escalation hit. My mailbox was vandalized. Flyers with threatening messages appeared overnight. Compliance is mandatory, they read. Resistance is futile. Whoever had done this wasn't just trying to intimidate me, they were sending a message to anyone who dared to challenge her authority. And that's when I realized, the HOA wasn't just enforcing rules anymore. It had become an apparatus of fear. A machine built to grind people down until they either gave up or cracked. And December 20th was the perfect day to strike, a date when everyone's attention is divided, when people are too busy with holidays to notice subtle manipulation, when small actions have an outsized impact. I had to make a choice. Do I continue quietly, documenting everything, hoping that my evidence will protect me? Or do I fight openly, knowing that confrontation could escalate the war? I chose to fight, but not recklessly. I began contacting former board members, neighbors who had suffered silently, and even legal advisors. Piece by piece, I built a network of awareness, a counterforce, and slowly, I realized that the neighborhood wasn't powerless. There were cracks in her armor. And December 20th was going to be the day those cracks widened. But HOA Karen had anticipated resistance. She had contingencies, plans within plans. And the moment I thought I had gained an advantage, she countered. Notices of violations appeared faster than I could respond. The energy of the neighborhood shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see who would blink first. I knew then that December 20th wouldn't just test me, it would test everyone. My family, my neighbors, and even the quiet voices who had so far stayed in the shadows. And as the sun set on the eve of that day, I felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. Because something was coming. Something bigger than letters, fines, or fences. Something calculated, precise, and terrifyingly personal. And when it landed, there would be no going back. The countdown had begun. Every tick of the clock brought us closer to a confrontation that would define not just one house, but the entire community. And I knew one thing for certain: if we weren't ready, we wouldn't just lose a property. We'd lose control of the reality we'd built for ourselves. December 20th arrived without ceremony. No sirens. No dramatic announcement. Just an eerie stillness that felt heavier than any warning ever could. The kind of quiet that makes you realize the real damage never happens loudly. It happens behind clipboards, signatures, and smiles. At 8:07 a.m., the email hit. Subject line: Final enforcement action. No greeting. No explanation. Just a list. Fines activated. Daily penalties authorized. Corrective action scheduled. That's when I understood her real strategy. HOA Karen wasn't trying to scare me into compliance anymore. She was trying to exhaust me. Drain me. Drown me in paperwork and pressure until I folded without a fight. By mid-morning, a tow truck circled my street. Slowly. Casually. Like a shark testing the water. My car was legally parked. Fully compliant. Didn't matter. They were probing. Looking for any excuse. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. Phones in hand. No one came outside. Fear had officially won its first battle. Then something unexpected happened. A knock. Not from the HOA. From a neighbor I barely knew. She whispered, "She did this to us 2 years ago. We lost the house." That sentence hit harder than any fine notice. Lost. The house. Not sold. Not moved. Lost. Over violations that sounded just as ridiculous as mine. Paint shades. Fence height. Non-compliant window trim. And suddenly, the scope snapped into focus. This wasn't about power trips or personality disorders. This was a pattern. A system. A legal loophole that allowed one person with enough persistence to financially bleed families dry. But here's the mistake HOA Karen made. She assumed isolation. She assumed fear would keep everyone silent. She assumed December 20th would pass quietly. She was wrong. By afternoon, my inbox looked different. Former board members replying. Neighbors forwarding documents. Screenshot. Emails. Evidence of selective enforcement. Proof she had ignored the same violations on other homes owned by friends, allies, people who didn't question her authority. That clause I'd found? It wasn't just leverage. It was a trigger. It activated an obligation she couldn't dodge. A formal hearing with quorum requirements she hadn't met. Every action she'd taken since December 20th? Potentially invalid. At 4:32 p.m., her tone changed. No more smiles. No more calm authority. The email was short, sharp, defensive. "We will review this internally." Internally. The word people use when they realize they've gone too far. That evening, something incredible happened. Lights came on. Doors opened. Neighbors talked. Compared note. Realized they weren't alone. Fear fractured. And once fear cracks, control collapses fast. But don't misunderstand, this wasn't over. People like HOA Karen don't retreat quietly. They don't apologize. They escalate or they self-destruct, trying to maintain control. And as I stood there watching the neighborhood wake up from its silence, I knew December 20th had done exactly what she never intended. It exposed the machinery, the manipulation, the truth. But the final move, the one that would end this for good, was still coming. And it would force her into a corner with no script, no rules to hide behind, and no power left to weaponize. This is the part nobody tells you about. The moment after the fear breaks. The moment when the person who built their power on silence realizes, the silence is gone. The hearing was scheduled quietly. No mass email. No announcement. Just a required notice buried in legal language, sent because she had no choice. The clause demanded it. Transparency. Quorum. Recorded minutes. Everything she'd spent years avoiding. She showed up confident, composed, clipboard in hand. The same smile. But it didn't land the same this time. Because the room wasn't empty. Neighbors filled the chairs. Some standing. Some holding folders thicker than mine. People who'd never spoken up before. People who'd paid fines they didn't owe. People who'd lost money, time, peace. And then the pattern unfolded out loud. Selective enforcement. Personal vendettas. Violations ignored for friends. Weaponized against dissenters. Dates lining up. December 20th showing up again and again like a signature. You could see it in her face. Not anger. Not fear. Confusion. Because systems like this only work when everyone believes they're alone. And suddenly no one was. The board tried to regain control. Procedural language. Calls for order. But the evidence didn't care about decorum. Screenshots were read into the record. Emails projected. Bylaws quoted line by line. Then came the vote. Emergency suspension of enforcement actions pending investigation. Fines frozen. Contractors cancelled. Liens halted. Her power didn't explode. It evaporated. Afterward, outside in the parking lot, something strange happened. People talked, laughed, exchanged numbers, compared stories. The neighborhood felt lighter, like a pressure system had finally moved on. And HOA Karen? She walked to her car alone. No clipboard. No entourage. No authority. Just another resident bound by the same rules she'd used to control everyone else. December 20th wasn't mystical. It wasn't cosmic. It was a warning. A reminder. A line in the sand that says, watch closely, document everything, and never assume quiet means harmless. If you're dealing with an HOA that feels off, trust that instinct. Control always leaves a paper trail. Power always overplays its hand eventually. And if this story sounds familiar, if you're seeing the signs in your own neighborhood, then this video found you for a reason. Because the moment you understand how the system really works, is the moment it stops working against you.